Hey, my name's Nick. I am a physiotherapist with E3 Chiropractic and Wellness, and today we are going to talk about some motor control and stability demands of a squat and eventually a deep squat. One of the most common flaws that people will kind of talk about or see when people are squatting is that a lot of people have a tendency to move a lot through their lower back. So one thing we want to work on is starting to move almost solely through the hip and through the lower extremity while trying to keep as stable as a lower back as we can. So a common fault when people are squatting is they get a lot of this rounding through their lower back to try and get down a little bit further. And so some of the stuff we do today is going to be really focused on trying to maintain a nice stiff core and getting most of that movement, if not all of that movement, through our hips and lower extremities. An awesome position to get started working on that core stiffness while moving through our hips is a dead bug position or laying down on our back. So what you can do is you can use a yoga block or a pillow or something for behind your head just to get a little bit more comfortable in that position. From here, we want to start by finding our neutral kind of lower back core position. So we don't want to be super extended and we don't want to be super flexed. We want to just find somewhere in the middle. So our lower back should be just lifted slightly off the floor. From here, you want to create tension in the front, side, and back of that core area. So you want to just create a little bit of pressure there. If you can, with one leg from this position, we want to try to keep this nice and stiff and not move through our lower back at all if we can. You want to think about bringing one leg down towards the ground and then hover. The tendency in this position is for your lower back to lift off the bed, but you want to try to keep things nice and stiff so that we're not doing that. From here, you can think about bringing that leg nice and high. So you want to think about bringing that knee to your chest, but same idea. We don't want to be rounding through that back to get there. You want to try to get all of that movement through the hip itself. You can make this harder by lifting up the opposite leg while you do this and moving back and forth, but the focus should always be on trying to maintain this lower back position, not lifting off the floor or pushing into the floor more than your starting position. You can do that same exercise flipped over, so on your hands and knees in a tabletop position. So same idea, not super flexed, not super extended. We're just somewhere in the middle here, creating tension all around that core or low back area so that we're not moving too much through our low back while we're doing this. You can use a yoga block or a ball or something on your back so that you can feel that area a little bit more as you're moving through this. But same idea, we create that tension in our lower back. You can start by pushing that leg backwards towards the back of the room, trying not to move that yoga block too much, getting that little bit of feedback from feeling that. And while keeping that core nice and tight, bringing this leg forward. The tendency when you're going backwards is going to be for that back to arch, and so you end up coming up super high. So we want to avoid that. And when you're coming forward, the tendency is going to be to round the back. And same thing for this exercise, the goal is to be moving solely through the hip and getting as little movement out of the back as we can. With this one, the goal is motor control and stability. And so high reps can be a good thing as long as you're doing that really, really well. You want to be strict with yourself. And if you're finding that you are having to cheat to get into those positions, it's better to just stop doing what you're doing rather than train a movement that we're trying to train away from, if that makes sense. So those can be two awesome ways to start training core stiffness and moving a little bit more through the hips. Another aspect of stability and motor control when we're talking about squatting is talking about the posture and position of our legs as we're going down into that squat. It's important to note that everyone has different hip anatomy, so the appropriate level of knees out and rotation and how much hip flexion someone can get into is fairly individual. If any of the advice that I talk about today is giving you pain, or if you're noticing things just aren't feeling right, it's probably a good idea to get assessed and get advice that is specific to your specific anatomy. In general, though, this is advice that applies to most people. So when we're squatting, basically what we want to think about is our knees tracking outwards towards the outside of our toes and using a lot of hip external rotation. So a good squat, the knees should track out a little bit and they should track kind of with the outside of our toes. So we're using a lot of glute and a lot of the muscles in our lower legs to do that. One awesome exercise or awesome way of trying to encourage that a little bit more is by using a band. So basically what you do is you can wrap a band or a loop band around the top of your knees or just below the knees. What that does is that tries to pull your knees together, so it gives you something to push actively against. From here, you want to think about pushing your knees out against that band the whole way down. If you ever find there's a position where you have one knee or both knees that want to kind of cave in a little bit, it's good to kind of stop there for a second and try to actively correct that by pushing out a little bit more. You should feel a good little pull kind of back in the glutes, and just even playing around with this, finding those positions that maybe feel a little bit more challenging for you can be an awesome way to even just target those specific little spots in your squat where you might start to collapse in a little bit.